2. The second Vartika gives one of the many dilemmas found in this work. If God is knowable by us, it will be easy enough to know him, and we do not require a superior light to guide us to him. If he is not knowable, then however we might try, we cannot discover him, and the worship of God will be all vain trouble. The meaning being that it is not possible to know with what is called pasha and pasujnanam, i.e., by the human powers and by the soul itself. The divine light, pathijnanam, must penetrate our soul, and then we can discover him dwelling in ourselves. And merging our personalities in him, we become indistinguishable from him, and we can, as it were, call ourselves even God in name. At no time can we therefore see God face to face, as he, as it were, lies behind us, lives in us, part of our very being. Sivagnana Siddhi summarizes the reasons thus. God cannot be perceived by the human intelligence, as he is not separate from the soul, as he illumines its intelligence, makes it understand whatever it thinks about, and as he has no such pride as I and mine, everything being in him, B and D and E. Maya is object, soul is subject. The object cannot perceive the subject, otherwise the subject will become the object and the object subject. God is true subject, and Maya and soul are object, and hence Maya and soul cannot perceive God. The subject receives further elaboration in the next sutra. See, the verse discusses the various conceptions of God by the yogis, and they are reduced to either mere idols of the human mind or fiction or non-entity, in all of which cases the meditation of God will bring no profit whatever. When the highest conceptions of God in the yoga philosophy are thus declared to be mere material idols or myths, it need not be pointed out that any representation of the unknown and the inconceivable by either the eye or the ear or any other human senses will be equally material conceptions and fruitless. This then is our real reason for the objection taken to all forms of idolatry. The religions ordinarily professing hatred of idolatry are based on such narrow philosophic foundations that they simply object to the idols of the eye, namely pictures and statues, etc. But their ordinary conceptions of God conveyed by the language and sound is equally gross and idolatrous. If you object to a male representation of God in gold or marble as your Father and to worship of the same, why do you call him our Father and our Lord and repeat other names which are mere idols of the ear? And what benefit would it bring you, the worship of these mere names, if you object to locate the picture of the eye in a temple? Why do you build him a temple in words and in your mind, and any Our Father which art in heaven? This heaven of your mind is as unreal a representation of God's abode as the temple of the earth. A prayer is a mere word or sound worship, and all our mantras fall within this category. God can only be and is therefore represented by means of all the human senses, and the mental conceptions simply follow from the sensory conceptions. Of all these, however, the eye and the ear, standing foremost among the most intellectual of the 5 gateways of knowledge, the symbolic forms of these 2 senses are deservedly most popular. And of these, the forms of the eye are all the varied forms of the universe, the 5 elements, the sun and the moon, and the luminaries, and all animals form chiefly man, comprised under what are called Ashtamuhurtham, which forms are again divided into Guru, Lingam, and Sangamam. Guru and Sangama comprising living beings, and Lingam including all pictorial and sculptural representations from the root lik, meaning to write or describe. The word Lipika used in The Secret Doctrine. The symbols represented to the ear are sounds, words, names, and mantras, prayers, etc. And of all these, the Pranava and Sri Pranchachara stand foremost. And these mantras form what is called Sabda Brahm. And how futile this worship of Sabda Brahm is when not accompanied by Pathijnanam is illustrated by the Puranic story of the rishis of the Tharukavana. The following extract from Barth's Religions of India. Sacrifice is only an act of preparation. It is the best of acts, but it is an act, and its fruits consequently perishable. Accordingly, although whole sections of these treatises, Upanishads, are taken up exclusively with speculations on the rites, what they teach may be summed up in the words of Mundaka Upanishad: know the Atman only, and away with everything else. It alone is the bridge to immortality. The Veda itself and the whole circle of sacred science are quite as sweepingly consigned to the second place. The Veda is not the true Brahm, it is only the reflection, and the science of this imperfect Brahm, this Sabda Brahm, or Brahm in words, is only a science or a lower order. The true science is that which has the true Brahm, the Para Brahman, for its subject. This the Vedas themselves resolve into a Sat, and they cannot know Sat. These thoughts are not only found in almost every page of our sacred literature, but they can be met with even in every popular song and story. If I attempt here any quotation, these will in themselves form matter for a separate book, but I am unwilling to leave it without a few, seeing the importance of the subject. Turning over the first few pages of Thiruvachakam, we meet with these. Behold the Supreme. Behold the most ancient God who cannot be described by words. Behold the incomprehensible being who cannot be reached by the human mind. Behold the Lord unknown to the immortals. He is passing the description of words not comprehensible by the mind, not visible to the eye and other senses. Note here the words eye and other senses. Praise be to the one who is passing speech and thought. Thou hast passed far beyond the reach of the Vedas, which called loudly for thee. He has no name and no form and no marks whatever. His lustrous crown is where all speech and thought cease to enter. He has no beginning, no attributes, and no end. Turn to the Theravam. Unless you can see him with his grace as your eye, you cannot describe him in words or pictures, as this is the God possessing such and such attributes, forms, and qualities. Says our sainted poetess, Karikalamayar, when I first became thy slave, I did not know thy form. I have not seen thy form, even now. What am I to say to those who ask me what thy form is? What is thy form? Which is it? None. Arthayamanavar. Having said so much, it might reasonably be asked, how is it that the Shaiva religion, whose temples are more numerous than that of any other faith, and are spread out from the Himalayas to Cape Comorin and the islands beyond, and from the caves of Elephanta to the rock-cut temples of Mahabalipuram, tolerates these practices? This is the subject of the next chapter, or sadhana, and the reason is found there. This symbolic worship, sensory and mental, is required as sadhana for the human soul, and these are not sadhya, i.e. the means to attain an end, the knowledge of sat, and not the end itself. Or in the words of the extract quoted above, these are acts of preparation. The human mind, if it must progress in spirituality, must withdraw more and more from its own self and rest itself on what it considers the highest, the holiest, and the loveliest, and bestow upon it all its deeds, riches, and thoughts. By such continued practice of altruism and love of Shivam, who is all love, will reach true bhakti, or patijnanam, described in the last chapter on Payan. Besides, when we must worship God, we must worship in that body in which he is present, and we have before shown that the whole universe, animate and inanimate, forms his body, and that all forms of nature are his, and our sages praise him therefore. Praise be to the one who is male, female, and neuter. The sages can only sing thy praises as the one immanent in all nature, and withal as being the immutable and unchangeable. We have not heard of any persons who have seen thee except in this way. Thou art beyond the reach of all thought. I have seen thee with my eyes. Thou art present even as the harmony in the vina. Thy greatness is being present in one and all, like the smell in the flower. Thou art present as light in the sun. Thou art present as the coolness in the moon. Thou hast added heat to the fire. Thou art present even as Akash, diffusing everywhere. Thou art present even as the sweetness in water. Thou art present even as the hardness in earth. Thou art present in each and everything as such, and yet art thou not all these things. Thou art ensnared by bhakti, love. Praise be to thee who hast forms and art formless. Praise be to thee who hast 1,000 names. Real seeing with our eyes is when we see thee. Real puja with our hands is when we worship thee. When we repeat thy names, it is uttering mantra. All the 5 elements in animate nature are thy gracious forms. Can I hope to see thy truth when I do not praise all forms as thy form? If it is said thou art formless, no, thou hast also a form. If it is said thou hast only a form, no, thou art also formless, thou art neither. And again, when we picture in words or in other minds God, say as the creator, the protector, and the destroyer, why should we not also picture him to our eye as such? It is not that when we speak of in words God as creator, etc., or think of him as such, we have really advanced in any way in our knowledge of God. And it is on this principle that the whole of the innumerable forms in temple worship has grown among the Hindus. Each form and every detail in that form is symbolic of some idea or thought. These forms are such that if today all our philosophical works and shastras, etc., are destroyed, it is possible to evolve all our various Hindu philosophical systems, moral, social, and religious, from these images alone, provided we possess the key. This is not an idle boast, but it is want of space and fear of encumbering the subject, which too much of my own views has forbid me to elaborate the subject further. However, I will continue this article by referring to and explaining in part the most important of the Shaivite forms, namely the image of Natesha and the Chin Mudra. It will be too great a detail if I proceed to describe the structure of the space or temple called Chit Ambaram or Chit Akash, Chit Sabha, and Pundarikapuram, or the city of the heart, in the midst of which the divine dancer performs his natak. The pose is that of a dancer, and now dance is defined as the music of motion, and when, as we have shown, God manifests himself as the great energy or force or Mahachaitanyam, when he wills that the whole universe of mind and matter should undergo evolution, creation, development, and reproduction, what could be more appropriate than to regard this grand moving force as a great dancer? In the words of our sage, our God is the dancer who, like the heat latent in the firewood, diffuses his power in mind and matter and makes them dance in their truth. I prefer again to quote the famous author of Chidambara Mumanikovai in order to explain a few of the other symbols. Roughly translated, the passage means, O my Lord, thy hand holding the sacred drum, Dhammaruka, has made and arranged the heavens and the earth and other worlds and innumerable souls. Thy raised hand protects the Chaitana and Achetana Prapancha which thou hast created. All these worlds are changed by thy hand bearing fire. Thy sacred foot, planted on the ground, furnishes rest to the tired soul struggling in the toils of karma and eating the fruits thereof. It is thy lifted foot which grants eternal bliss to those who approach thee. These panchakritya are in fact thy true handiwork. The curious may inquire how the hand with the drum signifies creation or creative power. Those who have read Mrs. Annie Besant's lecture on sound will have noted that when creation is started, sound, or natham, is the first product, out of which all other tattvas are evolved, and the Dhammarukam is probably the oldest and most primitive sound-producing instrument known to the Aryans, and which the use of it still in all religious observances also points to. The Chin Mudra, found in the person of the divine Guru Dakshinamurti, Murti, explains the nature of the three padarthas and the difference of the bandha and moksha conditions. For a fuller account of this symbol, see the pages of the Theosophist. Chapter 3, Special Sathanavial 7th Sutram. Respecting the Soul. Sutra. In the presence of Sat, everything else, cosmos, Asat, is Shunyam, is non-apparent. Hence, Sat cannot receive Asat. As Asat does not exist, it cannot receive Sat. That which perceives both cannot be either of them. This is the soul, called Sadasat. Note, this treats of the nature of the soul and consists of 3 arguments. First argument, Churnika. Hara has no experience of Pasa. Varthikam. As before, the perfect and eternal intelligence, the imperfect and acquired intelligence, falsehood, is shorn of its light. It is therefore established that in the presence of Shiva Sat, Asat loses its light. Udarana. Hara, who is not separate from Pasu and Pasa, cannot know them as objects, so he cannot know Asat as different even when he knows it. Evil Asat ceases to exist before him, as does darkness before the sun. Second argument, Churnika. Pasa cannot know Hara. Varthikam. Asat is non-intelligent, as it will be found to be so when examined closely. Udarana. The ignorant man who follows a mirage as water will find it to be false when he reaches it. So the soul whom God's grace has not reached will find Asat to be Sat. As Asat does not exist, it cannot know Sat. Therefore learn that Asat has no understanding. Third argument, Churnika. The soul lives in both. Varthikam. It is established that the soul which has such double perception is neither of them, as the soul is that which perceives both, understands on being taught, and exists in either condition eternally. Udarana. O thou who art engaged in deep studies, the soul has knowledge of both Sat and Asat, and hence is neither of them. It does not appear as equivalent to either of them, but it is in non-entity, being neither of them. Its nature is like the smell of the flower, which at another time became apparently visible. 2. Thou art not Sat, as thy understanding is changeful and imperfect, becoming deranged in disease and recovering its brightness when medicines are administered. Thou art neither Asat, as thou hast to eat the fruits of karma, knowingly performed by thyself, and which Asat cannot know and enjoy. Ignorance, Ajnanam, will not arise from God, who is the true intelligence, as it is Asat, like darkness before light. The soul which is ever united to God is co-eternal with him. The connection of ignorance with the soul is like the connection of salt with the water of the sea. Notes, we have proved to ourselves the existence of the 3 categories of Padarathas, Pathi, Pashu, and Pasa in the first chapter. We have learned to distinguish them further in the second chapter, and now, what is the use of all this knowledge? All knowledge and all philosophy will be utterly useless if it will not lead us to believe that we have a better end to attain to and to action that will bring about this end. The true end, or Siddhanta, is what is treated of in chapter 4, and its chapter preceding it is appropriately devoted to the treatment of the action, or sadhana, or means of attaining the true end. Now, in proceeding to begin sadhana, if we begin as the author of Vicharasagar begins, I am God, I worship myself. Why should I worship any other? We cannot achieve much. Unless we can distinguish ourselves from God, we cannot attempt to become God. This sutra, therefore, enjoins on the person beginning his practice a further caution not to mistake himself for God, thereby distinguishing between Sat, Asat, and Sadasat, and showing also what becomes of the lower planes when we pass on to the higher. Asat has already been explained to mean other than Sat. This word and Shunyam do not mean non-existent and non-entity, but also mean non-apparent or non-luminous or non-distinguishable. The Ganges, pouring from its 1,000 mouths into the broad sea, preserves its taste and reddish color for miles and miles beyond, but as we proceed down, the water gradually loses its taste and color, And finally, sure as anything, we cannot find it. It is lost completely. No, it is not lost. The great sea, which is greater than the great Ganges, has completely engulfed and covered it up, and in consequence it is the sea and its salt, and not the Ganges and its taste that is apparent to us. Sea is Sat, and the Ganges mingling with it is Asat or Shunyam. Again, darkness is as real as experience of our sight as daylight. We speak of darkness engulfing the whole world of night, but with the first streak of dawn, darkness has completely fled and vanished. Has it? And if so, where to? No, it has neither gone nor fled anywhere, nor has it become non-existent. Darkness is present in light and is completely absorbed in it. The greater glory and power of the one subjugates or covers the power of the other. We have elsewhere referred to the analogy of the sunlight and stars. God cannot distinguish it as apart from him, as we distinguish one object from another. Knowledge and consciousness is only relative, and in the presence of the Absolute, the All, there could be no relativity and no knowledge or consciousness. Hence, Sat cannot perceive Asat. As elsewhere explained, in the subjective state, the object vanishes. That is, in pure subjective consciousness, objective consciousness merges, becomes indistinguishable, where there is no knowledge of object. 2. Asat cannot perceive Sat, as it cannot rise above itself in perception, and as it is itself the object of the soul, so it is doubly distant from Sat. This argument brings out the whole subject of Atma Darshan, and shows how the soul can be seen or perceived. The soul cannot be perceived directly, as this is physically and psychologically impossible. It is by learning to distinguish itself from other things that it can know what it really is. There are two such things from which it has to distinguish itself, namely Sat and Asat. In the human condition, it is one with Asat, and the first step in spiritual progress is to distinguish itself, and then slowly to separate itself from Asat. But it should not be supposed from the fact of the soul rising to its own plane from Asat that it is a compound or an effect or Asat itself. The soul did exist in Asat even previously, though in a latent or unperceived condition, and it rises out of Asat as the smell of the flower rises out of the tree or plant in which it was not perceived before. Rising to itself, the soul should not stop there, but must again learn to distinguish itself from Sat, and then try its best to lift itself into the plane of Sat, with which also it was connected as the flower and the plant. In the tree of life, soul, the sweet blossom of Shivam blossoms out. In the Bandha condition, the soul appeared only as Asat, and when the Bandha is removed, freedom is obtained, and it then appears not itself, but as Shivam. So in neither condition, its own nature is subordinated to the one to which it is connected for the time being, and apart from either, it cannot find a resting place, and it lives, therefore, in both. Therefore, at all times, all the three existed together, yet at one time soul and Sat were non-apparent, and Asat alone apparent, like the tree before blossoming, and at another time Asat disappears, and the soul is enveloped in Shivam, and the brightness and sweetness of the flower alone shines out. Tirumantaram. The soul, which in its real condition is of the form of Shivam, is confined and conditioned by its connection with Malam. When this Botham therefore ceases, it assumes the form of Shivam. See, the last illustration contains a favorite analogy. God is the sea, or the vast space giving room to a vast volume of water, and things contained in it, the all-container, the Sharva Vyapaka. The water is the soul, which is Vyapti, and the salt of the water is the Malam, which is Vyapya. The import of the analogy in this place is that though it is the sea which gives room to the water and the salt, yet the salt does not attach itself to the sea space, but to the water. And the salt, though it is always present in seawater, the water in its original or real condition is not so connected, and this connection can be separated. 8. Eighth Sutra. The way in which souls obtain wisdom. Sutra. The Lord, appearing as Guru to the soul which had advanced in tapas, virtue and knowledge, instructs him that he has wasted himself by living among the savages of the five senses, and on this the soul, understanding its real nature, leaves its former associates, and not being different from them, becomes united to his feet. Commentary. This explains the path of attaining jnanam and consists of 4 arguments. First argument, Churnika. Souls will obtain wisdom from tapas. Vartikam. Moksha cannot be obtained when performing sarya, kriya, and yoga unless the supreme jnanam is attained by tapas affected in all previous births. Udarana. A. Those who have performed tapas enjoy his fruits in the various tapalokas, heavens, and when they attain good births, so that they may get rid of even these desires by eating the fruits of these desires and attain jnanam. This is what the learned in the Shastras say. B. The bliss secured by the much-praised sacrificial acts will be like the pleasure derived by the hungry man after eating, and who again becomes hungry. The soul will join its jnana guru when, by its indestructible tapas, sarya, kriya, and yoga, its good and bad karma become perfectly balanced. Second argument. Churnika. He who comes as the Sarguru of the souls is Hara. Vartikam. It is established that the Lord appearing as Guru will teach the souls as not being separate from the souls. He shines in the light of the souls as his body. Udarana. A. God imparts jnanam to Vijnana Kalars as they dwell in himself. To Pralaya Kalars he appears as Guru in his divine form and imparts jnanam, and to Sakalars he appears as Guru concealing himself in human form and imparts jnanam. B. The souls will not attain jnanam unless imparted by God in order. Those Pralayar and Sakalar who are instructed by the perfect Lord of the world receive such instructions in the second and third persons respectively. Those Vijnana Kalar who do not receive such imperfect instruction attain moksha jnanam from God by intuition. C. The milk and tears, which did not exist before, appear in the person of the well-adorned mother after the birth of the child as the result of her love, who will therefore understand the Lord who is present in the soul unperceived, like the Akash in the water, if he did not appear in the form of the divine Guru. Third argument. Churnika. The soul does not see itself when in union with the five senses. Vartikam. The souls, being blinded by the senses, forget their real nature, as the senses do not show the soul its own nature, but only put before it its own impressions, just like the colors reflected on a mirror. Udarana. The soul, who after reflecting that the knowledge derived from the material senses is only material, like the colors reflected on a mirror, and that these color-like sensations are different from itself, and after perceiving such false knowledge as false, understands the truth, will become the servant of God, who is different from such asat. Fourth argument. Churnika. The soul will know itself when it forgets the senses. Vartikam. The soul searches the feet of the Lord when it sees itself to be different from the senses, just as a man reaches the ground when the rope of the swing breaks. Udarana. A. The soul which becomes bound with pasam, like the river flood when stopped by an embankment, will not leave the divine feet of the Lord, who is unchangeable, after once attaining them on being freed from the ties of the world, like the flood which reaches the sea on the embankments being destroyed. B. If every object is God, then nobody need attain God's feet. If he is not everything, he is not God. Everything cannot see him, as though the eye sees all objects. All the other senses cannot see. Understand the supremacy of eyesight in persons who recover their eyesight. C. O thou who hast found that thou art not the five senses, the Sakala who has reached the divine Guru, after leaving the knowledge of the five senses, yet is not separated from the five senses. If the result of mala and karma again surround him, as the separated moss covers the water again, a little while after a stone is thrown, let him remove it by contemplating on him who is never separate from him. Notes. After showing in the last sutra what the soul has to achieve, this sutra proceeds to explain the sadhanas and the fruits of such sadhana. To begin with, the soul, by its practice of tapas in all its past and present birth, must have acquired sufficient knowledge and spirituality as to be able to attain jnana. Tapas, as here used, means and includes 3 out of the 4 pathams, or paths, described in this school, namely Charya, Kriya, and Yoga. Sarya and Kriya include all kinds of altruistic and moral and religious practices. All these 3, which are placed in an ascending order, bring about what is called balancing of the good and bad karma and the maturing of mala before it can be dropped. The practice of these sadhanas develop in the soul true knowledge, jnanam, and love, bhakti, and God, who is all love, appears as Guru and imparts jnanam, the 4th patham, by showing it its true nature, and the soul attaining jnanam frees itself from asad and reaches the feet of the sad. Hence the 4 paths, sarya, kriya, yoga, and jnanam, lead to 4 fruits or sadhya, namely Iruvinayopu, Malaparapaga, Sadguru Darshana, and Satinipada, reaching divine grace. The illustrations to the first argument point out that it is most possible to attain a good many powers and enjoyments by the practice of tapas, none of which, however, will be lasting or lead one to freedom and eternal bliss. They only beget further karma and further births. The true tapasi will aim at destroying all karmas and reach his true guru, and the second argument points out who the Sadguru is, and illustration C shows how he is to be obtained. This guru cannot be any other than God, and except by his touch it is impossible to obtain jnanam. By practice of true tapas, by intense devotion and love, it is easy to attract God to oneself as his guru. The ignorant think that God and love are different. None knows that God and love are the same. Did all men know that God and love are the same, they would repose in God as love. Tiramantaram. It will therefore be seen that the whole of the moral, religious, and psychical yoga practices are simply preparatory acts and can never be ends in themselves and can never be of any use unless the true end is kept in view. O my Lord, are not the 4 paths from the much-desired sarya to jnanam like the unopened flower, the blossom, the unripe fruit, and the ripe fruit? And the author of Ojiviladukam, who is a true Siddhantin, appropriately devotes 3 of his chapters to Sarya Kalatri, Kriya Kalatri, and Yoga Kalatri, in which he exposes and reviles in unmeasured terms the practices of impostors, false prophets, and Pharisees. And again, the doctrines of the divine guru, as expounded here, should be particularly noted and distinguished. In fact, if one takes all the beliefs and practices of every religion and every faith, all the world over, it is just possible to reduce them all to one common law and common principle. Through sheer forgetfulness of this common principle, and through distance of time and place, the true belief and practice has been lost sight of, and if preserved, the mere shadow of them are preserved. And when people speculate on them fresh, all sorts of theories and explanations are given, and these remarks supply with very great force to the doctrine in question. So far is true that unless God comes down as man and guru and touches man with his aurul or grace, he cannot attain salvation. But when we proceed further and ask who this guru is, when and how he appears and acts, why and wherefore he appears, whom he purifies and how he purifies, the answers are returned as each man's fancy dictates to him. Without any reference to God's and nature's laws, the doctrines of atonement is as puerile as the belief of the villager who seeks to appease his village deity by sacrificing a cock or hen. And the doctrine of mediation, admittedly based on no higher principle than that of human agency, instances of which are the judge, prisoner, and lawyer, king, subjects, and viceroy, etc., which clearly involves the impairing of the omniscience and omnipotency of the supreme ruler of the universe, is equally unsatisfactory. If the guru is himself God, how could he be a mediator? God is in man and can appear to him as man, but cannot become man. He dwells in our hearts and understands all our wants, and he meets all our wants. He knows our disease and our sufferings, and he has a balm already prepared for us. Nobody need therefore tell him what we want, what our disease and pain are, and to crave his mercy for us. As he is all love and all mercy, there is no mediation. The touch of the Guru converts the already prepared baser metal into gold. This touch is as the surgeon's lancet, which opens up and heals all abscess fully matured. Just as the loving mother runs and takes to her breast the crying child, so God reaches us the instant we lift our voice to him. It is also seen that it is necessary for God to appear as man, only so far as man and Sakalars are concerned, and that as far as other advanced souls, Vijnana Kalars, are concerned, he induced Jnanam in them intuitively. The necessity, so far as man is concerned, arises because man cannot know otherwise. Again, the sinner to expect salvation as he lisps while he dies some dead names and words is absurd, as also to expect that some dead names will produce such effects for all time to come. Tested by the truth is laid down in this sutra, the ordinary observances and beliefs of almost every religion, Shaiva and other Hindu religions included, will be a mere mockery and sham, but still it will be observed that even among Hindu religions, the Shaiva religion does not tolerate hierarchy in any form. 3. The human soul is compared to the son of a king stolen by savages, at his very birth and living among them, and who can never understand his identity until informed and recognized by the king himself. The soul in its nature of pristine purity develops itself only as its cosmic covering also evolves, and will recover itself only with the touch of the divine Guru. The soul is again compared to a painted glass or mirror in which the identity of the mirror is lost and will not be recovered unless the paint is washed away. 4. The language reaching the feet of the Lord is significant. The freed soul does not become coextensive if we can use the word with God. It simply becomes embedded in it, a mere drop in the vast ocean, a mere trace, as it were. Even among Shaivas, not to say of other schools among Hindu philosophers, even among the commentators of this very book, there are differences of opinion as regards the condition of the freed soul in union with God. The opinion of the author may be, however, taken as stated above. The soul is like the flickering lamp tossed by the wind in darkness, and which loses itself completely in bright noonday light and remains still and quiet. There is eternal joy, however, in such a change and passage, and it may be compared to the great joy of the person passing from darkness to light, and of the blind person recovering his eyesight. C. This Udarana points out that the bodily infirmities of the effects do not cease altogether even after the touch of the divine Guru. These infirmities have been so firmly rooted in a man and had become so strong that it takes even some time after Sadguru Darshan to remove the effects of its former association completely. During this interval, the soul, becoming freed, is enjoined to contemplate God, and this last injunction is what is elaborated in the next sutra. 9. Ninth Sutra. On the purification of the soul. Sutra. The soul, on perceiving in itself with the eye of Jnanam the Lord who cannot be perceived by the human intellect or senses, and on giving up the world, Pasa, by knowing it to be false as a mirage, will find its rest in the Lord. Let the soul contemplate Sri Panchachara according to law. Commentary. This treats of the manner of purifying the soul and consists of 3 arguments. First argument, Churnika. The soul can perceive Hara only with its Jnanam. Vartikam, that the soul should see the soul by its eye of Jnanam, is established by the fact that the Lord cannot be perceived by the human senses and faculties and is otherwise perceivable. Udarana. A person, after examining the nerves, bones, pus, phlegm, of which he is composed of, and not finding what he is, arrives at the knowledge that he must understand with some other intelligence, and unless he then understands his God and his own self with the aid of Hara, how else is he to understand his own self? B. The eye, which points out all things, cannot see itself, nor can it see the soul, which enables it to see, and the soul, which enables the eye to see, cannot see itself, nor God, who enables it to see. As God is one with the soul when it so understands, so examine the way in which he so exists in thy understanding. Second argument. Churnika. Hara will appear to the soul when it relinquishes the world, pasa. Vartikam. It should be found by experience when the soul sees the world, which is asad, as asad. It will find its being where it was before in jnana sorupam, just as when the colors reflected on a mirror are understood to be colors, we can see the mirror itself. Udarana. A. Will not the Lord, who is nirguna, nirmala, eternal happiness, tatparam, above all things, and beyond comparison, and appears to the soul when it gets rid of the tattvas such as akash, etc., will not he appear as a far transcending wonder, and as an inseparable light of its understanding? B. When thou seest all the void as asad, then understand what remains is clearly sat. Yet thou who hitherto hadst knowledge of the world art not sat. If thou unitest thyself to sat and obtainest its divine form, asat will altogether leave thee. C. When the soul leaves asat on finding that what he had known is not sat, and examines the Lord of the universe in itself and perceives him as itself, it leaves its pasam by his aid, as the snake-bitten man is cured by the snake charmer contemplating on Garuda. Third argument. Churnika. If the soul contemplates Sri Panchachara, its Vasanamala will disappear. Vartikam. Understand that the contemplation of Sri Panchachara according to law is herein enjoined for the purpose of freeing the soul of its hankering after evil, which it does by its long association even after attaining the knowledge of the jnana, just like the worm feeding on the bitter margosa bark returns to it even after tasting the sweets of the sugar cane. Udarana. A. If the soul perceives by pronouncing Sri Panchachara that it is the servant of Hara and does puja to him in the region of the heart by means of Sri Panchachara and performs homam by the same means in the region of Kundalini, nave, and contemplates him between the eyebrows, the Lord will appear to the soul and the soul will become his servant. B. If the soul sees the Lord in his heart as the shadow, planets, Ragu, and Ketu are seen in the sun and in the moon, the Lord will appear as the light of the soul, just as the latent fire appears when pieces of wood are rubbed together. The soul will then become his servant, just as the iron becomes fire when heated. Therefore contemplate on Sri Panchachara. C. If the real nature of the heart of the lotus is examined, its stalk will be the 24 tattvas beginning with earth, its petals will be Vidya tattvas and Sutadvidya, its pollen the 64 kalas of Ishvara and Satashiva, its ovary Shakti, the essence of the kalas, and the seeds the 51 forms of Natham, and the Arul Shakti of the Lord Shiva rests on it. Therefore contemplate on Sri Panchachara. Notes. This sutra treats of the sadhana that is required for the Jnanapada, and during the period after Sadguru Darshan, and before becoming Jivan Mukta, and while in the human body. The necessity for any sadhana at all during this period is because, as is indicated in the third argument, the human soul, by its long association with asat, sometimes forgets itself even after it has found out its own nature, and though it cannot do evil, there is an hankering after evil. This is what is called Varshana-malam and Thotsham, evil of habit or association. The man whose sight is restored in the beginning loves to shut his eyes a little. The worm, even tasting sweetness, forgets it and delights to eat the bitter bark by its long habit previously contracted. The reason why it lingers is shown further on by the udarana of the potter's wheel, which revolves even after the potter's hand is withdrawn, and the empty asafetida pot. The sadhana given in this sutra for removing this vasanamalam is the contemplation of Sri Panchachara, or say pranavam, and here we pass into the subject of ahadhyana, as assisted from Purajnanam, esoteric worship from exoteric worship. There is, however, a correspondence between these two, and the correspondence is that between a reality and a symbol. The various rituals employed in temple worship correspond to various real spiritual practices employed in esoteric worship. The subject is too abstruse even for me, especially as I am not yet an initiate, and any elaboration of it is altogether beyond the scope of this work. The object of the original work itself is to lay down and explain the foundations, the basic principles of our philosophy and religion, and I need not pass beyond this either. The principle of this sadhana is contained in the second argument and brought out more fully in illustration. See, this principle is what is called Soham Bhavana. Soham is from the root sa, meaning it, denoting Brahm, and aham, meaning I or me, denoting soul. The word Shivoham is also its equivalent, and the word means Brahm is myself, or I am Brahm. This, in fact, is also the purport of the 4 Mahavakyas in the Veda, which are 4 mantras intended for practice or sadhana, and to be taught by the Guru to the initiate. Like every other sadhana provided for the first 3 stages, which are mistaken for the end itself, this Soham sadhana is mistaken for the end itself by Vedantists, and these proclaim that they are themselves God. And the caution is therefore conveyed and repeated several times in the first and second arguments, and in the illustrations, see especially illustration 2b, that the soul practicing Sohambhavana should not mistake itself for God. This practice of the jnani, therefore, is as much a symbolic worship or bhavana as that of the yogi, illustration 2c, Sutra 6. But the yogi gains certain sadhya or siddhis by his bhavana, and the jnani also gains something, and what this is shown in the third argument. The great mistake of Vedantic writers and Vedantic books consists in this, that instead of treating of the Mahavakya in its proper place and confining it within its proper scope, they discuss it when they speak of proof or in the argumentative or expository stage, and this is what makes many of these books ridiculous. To say to ordinary mortals that he is God and he must believe himself to be God is certainly absurd when, as we have seen above, to whom and by whom this instruction, mantra, has to be imparted, and even then accompanied with proper caution. This then is what constitutes throwing pearls before swine, and who is the more blameworthy of the two? I must now proceed to explain the principle of Soham Bhavana contained in 2c. As the illustration of the snake charmer points out, this is the underlying principle of all mantras. By frequent practice of the mantra, by contemplation of the principle underlying the mantra, the person contemplating becomes converted into the mantric idea or principle itself, i.e. the idea becomes the actuality, and this also explains the siddhis acquired by yogis by willpower. So when the jnani contemplates on Sri Panchachara and that he is Brahm or Shivam, he becomes Brahm itself. Here note again the difference. It is not total conversion. What happens is this: what was before not apparent and in himself becomes apparent, as the invisible shadow planets become visible in the sun and the moon at eclipse time. With this effect again, however, that the first soul goes down and becomes non-apparent, and the other Brahm becomes apparent and supreme, as the invisible oxygen, always in contact with a piece of wood, when it chemically combines with the wood, altogether changes its form into its own as a living, shining fire. Third argument, illustration B. Here it is seen, it is the fire or oxygen, Brahm, that it is supreme, and not a piece of wood or iron, soul, which the former subordinates. So even in mukti, the soul is really the servant of God. Chapter 4, Payaniyal, 10th Sutra. The way of destroying Pasha, Sutra. As the Lord becomes one with the soul in its human condition, so let the soul become one with him, and perceive all its actions to be his. Then will it lose all its mala, maya, and karma. Commentary. This sutra treats of the way of destroying pasha and consists of two arguments. First argument, Churnika, become one with hara. Vartikam, it is pointed out here that the soul should become one with Parameshvara, as he had become one with it, as when it does so, it joins his feet by losing its pride of self and self-knowledge. Udarana, when the soul asserts its own knowledge by distinguishing its acts from those of others, the Lord, losing his identity, will appear as the soul, but the soul which says that there is no such thing as itself and that all actions are his, the Lord unites to his feet and reveals his real self to it. Second argument, Churnika, consider all your actions to be those of the Lord. Vartikam, it is enjoined that the soul should perceive its actions to be those of the Lord's unceasingly, as it will not act except with his arul, and in consequence ignorance and karma will not enter it. Udarana, if the soul determines that the senses are not itself, and that their actions are not its own, and that the perceived objects are also not itself, and that it is the servant of hara, and then arrives at the conclusion that everything is his work, then none of the actions of the soul, which thus attributes every work to him, will affect it, in whatever body it may be encased. The prarabdha karma will also then cease. B. It is the prerogative of the great to protect those who resort to them, so God raises those who approach him, and yet bears no ill will to the rest. He transforms his devotees into his own form, and the rest who do not approach him, he makes them eat the fruits of their own karma. These two functions he performs according to the deserts of each. C. Like the smell which is present in the pot, even after the asafetida is removed, the effects of the jnani's previous karma will be felt in the material body, and yet they will not furnish food for a future birth, as it, having been transformed into the Lord, is fixed in him. D. Like the siddha who, sitting in fire, is not burnt by it, and like the horseman who, riding on the fleetest animal, does not lose his hold, the jnanis who, ascertaining the true path, fix their thoughts on the divine feet of hara, who will not, though having perception through the senses, be affected by such perception and leave their true nature. E. If one finding the truth that he is sadasat understands only with Sivagnanam, he will not be affected by anavamala and will become united to Sat. Then will not the affections of the senses influence him, just as the darkness will have no effect before the fierce light of the sun. Notes. In the last sutra, it was enjoined that the soul should contemplate on Sri Panchachara for the purpose of effecting its purification. The present chapter treats of the palan, or ends to be achieved by the sadhanas mentioned in the foregoing chapter. The end, it is agreed on all sides, is what is called moksha or mukti or vidu in Tamil. The word literally means freed or freedom, and it therefore imports two things. When the soul attains mukti, it is freed from ignorance or pasam, the pasa and pasu jnanam, and attains pati jnanam, the very act which separates the soul from pasam, jagat, unites it to the pati, Brahm. As was before illustrated by the case of the man reaching the ground by the breaking of the rope of the swing. Of these two results of mukti, this sutra treats of Pashakshaya, or the mode by which the soul is freed of pasha. This is achieved by the soul becoming one with God and by considering all its actions as those of the Lord. Becoming one with God means attaining Advaita relation, and to remove all doubts about what this Advaita relation is, the sutra points out that the soul should become one with God in mukti as God was one with the soul in its bantha condition. This relationship is further explained in the next sutra in explaining attainment of pati jnanam. Some of the purvapaksha theories relating to the condition of the soul in mukti are as follows. Freedom or unity is reached. 1. When the akash of the pot unites with the outer akash by breaking of the pot. 2. When the man mistaken for a post is ascertained to be a man. 3. When the cause of the earthen pot is found to be earth, causation. 4. When the color or quality of a thing is found to be united to the thing itself, a thing and its inseparable attribute. 5. When the iron becomes red hot, iron in heat. 6. When water is mixed with the milk. 7. When the charmer becomes one with the object of his mantra. 8. When the heated iron absorbs water. 9. When the man becomes one with the devil, when possessed. 10. When the fire pot is covered up by the flames. 11. When the lamp is lighted before the midday sun. 12. When two lovers become one by the result of their love. 13. When two friends become united by friendship. 14. When two animals are one by mere resemblance or similarity, such as color, etc. It would be noticed that some of these relationships are exactly what have been already used as illustrations in the preceding pages, but it should be carefully noted that they are used as mere illustrations only and nothing more. These are not to be mistaken for the actual truth itself, and the only similarity in nature which approximates almost to truth itself is found in the relation of the soul and God in the Bantha condition. In the Bantha condition, soul exists and God is non-existent. In Mukti, God exists and soul is non-existent, yet in either case neither God nor soul is non-existent. The relationship contemplated in the last sutra is what is called that of Jnatru, Jnana, and Jnaya. Mukti cannot be attained if this relation is preserved and useless. Advaita relation is established. It is not even sufficient if it becomes one for the purpose of rooting out all karma, and the soul is therefore enjoined to consider its actions as those of the Lord. These injunctions are of course for the jnani attaining mukti even in this life. So long as the human body lasts, the effects of prarabdha will sometimes linger as the smell of the asafetida lingers in the pot, or as the author of Sivagnana Siddhi adds, the wheel of the pot continues to revolve for some time even after the hand of the potter is removed. Sanjita karma is destroyed by the very touch of the jnana guru as the seed coming in contact with fire. Prarabdha continues, and it is destroyed by practicing the sadhana contained in the last sutra, and its effects, or vasana, are destroyed by the condition attained by the jivan mukta. But so long as the human body continues, some acts will have to be performed by the jivan mukta, and it is shown by the illustrations. These acts will not produce any other acts or form the seed for any future karma or akamya, and no other births will be induced. The arguments point out why the condition attained by the Jivan Mukta has the effect of destroying Pasha. It is because the soul thereby loses its ahankara and mamakara, or anava, and this last is the source of all evil, all karma, and successive births. The learned commentator of Ojaviladukum and the author of several excellent devotional works argues out the existence of the three padarthas and the rest of the doctrine from the word mukti or vidu itself in the following stanza. J.M.Nallaswami of Tirupur. As the word mukti or vidu means freedom, it imports clearly a free being and an unfreed or fettered being. The fetters can never become removed of themselves, hence this Botham is jatam or asat. So saying, O thou healer of sins, thou hast appeared to me as my Sadguru, the victor of the savages of the senses, and hast taught me to infer for certain the three padarthas, pati, pasu, and pasa, from the word mukti, and has graciously taken me as thy servant. 11th Sutra. The way by which soul unites with God. Sutra. As the soul enables the eye to see and itself sees, so Hara enables the soul to know and itself knows, and this Advaita knowledge and undying love will unite it to his feet. Commentary. The sutra treats of the way by which the soul unites with the sacred foot of the Lord and consists of two arguments. First argument. Churnika. Hara feels what the jnani feels. Vartikam. It is proved that the Lord knows whatever the soul knows, as the soul cannot perceive anything except with the aid of the Lord. Udarana. A. As the soul becomes conscious of such objects only as it comes in contact with each of the senses separately, it cannot apprehend all the objects of the five senses at once, but apprehends them only one by one. But God sees and understands all things at once. B. When the soul unites itself to God and feels his arul, God covers it with his supreme bliss and becomes one with it. Will he not know himself who is understood by the soul through the intelligence of the soul? Second argument, Churnika. If the jnani has unfailing love for Hara, he will become united to him. Vartakam. It is shown that the soul unites with the feet of the Lord through unfailing love, as he, dwelling in each man inseparably, meets out to each according to his desert. Udarana. A. The blind will only see darkness even in the presence of the sun. Just so, the soul entangled in Pasha cannot see Isa, though he is present in everything. Just as the sun only opens the lotus flower when it is matured, so the darkness of those who understand him by their love will be removed by his arul. B. As the sun dispels the deep darkness, so God, who is connected with the soul from eternity in his love, removes the mala of the soul and attracts it to himself, just as the magnet attracts iron and brings it under control. While so operating, he incurs neither weariness nor change. C. When becoming one with God, if the soul perished, there will be nothing to unite with God as it perishes. If it did not perish, it cannot become one with God. Just like the salt dissolving in water, the soul, after losing its mala, unites itself to his feet and becomes the servant of God, loses its individuality. Then it will have no darkness, no separation. D. Just as the rising sun is enshrouded by the clouds and then appears little by little, and when all the clouds are driven away, spreads its shining rays everywhere, so the soul's intelligence is enshrouded from eternity in mala and brightens a little from its experience of the world. And getting rid of its mala altogether recovers its original intelligence and unites itself to the feet of God. Notes. The last sutra treated of Pashakshaya, and the present one treats of attaining Patijnana or Anubhava, leaving the case of those who postulate utter annihilation at this stage, in which case, of course, there could be no union, illustration 2c, and of those who postulate no Anubhava at all. This sutra points out how this Anubhava arises. This Anubhava is an Anubhava of the soul in one sense, though not so in another sense. Here there is Advaitam again. Dr. Bain instances the case of a man enjoying the keen pleasures of a warm bath as one of pure objective feeling or attitude, or as he would put it, it is the case of the man enjoying the pleasures of a cool bath during a hot day, or what comes to the same thing, of the man who gets under the cool shelter of a spreading banyan tree after a hot and weary walk during the midday sun. Now substitute the mind, the soul freed of pasha, and for the cool bath or cool shade, the glorious divine light and its effulgence, which permeates the soul through and through and diffuses all around it and completely bathes it in its arul. And conceive then the soul's feeling of pleasure, its ananda, bliss. It is the soul that no doubt feels primarily, but it ceases to live as such, and that very moment it becomes transformed into the divine feeling or anubhava itself. Just as the mind, when enjoying the pleasure of a bath, becomes purely objective, the soul becomes purely divine when it feels his arul and God covers it with bliss. As you feel the coolness of the bath or the shade more and more, your pleasure increases, so as the soul feels his arul more and more, its love of the Lord increases. So it is this undying love, true bhakti, that is the cause of the soul's supreme happiness, bliss, and patijnanam. And in this Advaita Anubhava do we get the true definition of love or bhakti, and see the profound meaning there is in the simple mantra, God is love. And now let us read again the divine mantra, which can bear repetition. Herein we have the true Bhakti Marga, or the true Dasha Marga, which at the same time is seen to be the true Jnana Marga. Herein is seen no conflict between Bhakti and Jnanam. Yet how often do we see the followers of the so-called Bhakti Marga sneer at the followers of the so-called Jnana Marga, and vice versa, when neither party has the least title to either name. The words Bhakta, Jnani, and Mukta are synonymous, and the condition of the Bhakta involves and implies the passing through of the stages of Charya, Kriya, and Yoga. And it was a bad day for us when a wave of false devotion spread from the north to the south, thus undermining all principles of true progress by the practice of true tapas and spreading instead gross superstition and absurd rituals and ceremonies. I cannot conclude this sutra without pointing out an example of the exhibition of true bhakti by a Jivan Mukta from the annals of the saints recorded in our Bhakta Vilasha. Whom could I mean other than our Saint Kanapa? Says our Saint Manika Vachaka, whose divine words are sufficient to melt even the heart of stone to tears, and where he has chosen to praise, why need I refer to the host of other sages and writers who have loved to sing the praises of our Kanapa? Says our Sri Shankaracharya also in his Shivanatha Lahiri, a pair of wooden shoes worn out in paths becomes a bunch of holy grass to the person of Shiva, the splitting of water raising the mouth a holy bath, a mouthful of flesh partly eaten, a fresh oblation, and a forester a great bhakta, for nothing is impossible for bhakta. I dare not follow the subject any further, says our Thayamanavar. This is a most beautiful analogy, and this being the last sums up briefly the whole of the doctrine expounded in all the preceding chapters. It exhibits in clear and unmistakable language the passage of the soul through the Kevala, Sakala, and Thurya avashtas. As the first part of the Udarana stands, it would appear that it is the sun that is enshrouded, and that which appears little by little and then shines brightly. No, the language will be unmeaning from the standpoint of the sun. From its position it knows of no covering or shrouds or shining less or more. It is ever bright in itself. It is from the standpoint of the human eye that all this language is employed. It is the eye that is enshrouded by the clouds and prevented therefore from seeing the glorious sun. And when the clouds are driven away little by little, the view of the sun becomes better and better till at last, during the midday, the full refulgence of the glorious sun is felt. The brevity of language thus employed in many of these analogies have often misled many a thinker, and we find the Hindu idealists use this very analogy to establish their theory of Ekatmavada. As they put it, the clouds proceed from the sun and then enshroud it. So Maya starts from Brahm and throws a veil over it, and then they proceed to build the whole fabric. In the first place, an analogy to have any probative effect must be true in itself, i.e., the same sequence and consequence must exist in the thing compared, as in the thing sought to be proved or inferred. Here in the illustration, if it be true that the clouds proceed from the sun, then we can say truly that the Maya proceeding from the Brahm serves to veil it. In no sense is the sun the material cause of the cloud, as the Brahm is said to be the material cause, Upadana Karana, of Maya, Mula Prakriti, Jagat, or the universe. This essential condition failing, the whole superstructure must therefore tumble down. But let me elaborate the analogy properly and see what results it yields. Well, the sun, Brahm, is not the material cause of the clouds, Mula Prakriti, but yet it is a cause of clouds. It is by the action of the sun's heat, Kriya Shakti, that the clouds, Mula Prakriti, are formed out of water, Maya. Water itself cannot pass off into vapor and clouds but by the action of the sun. So Maya cannot evolve into Jagat or the universe but for the Kriya Shakti of the Lord. No doubt, when the clouds are formed by the action of the sun, these clouds do enshroud, well, not the sun, but the human eye. The very instant you use the word shrouding or veiling, you imply a third thing placed on the other side of the veil. The human eye can no more be derived from the sun than the soul or human monad from Brahm, though in either case the eye or the soul can only see or know but with the dim or full light of the sun or God, Brahm. The greater or less dimness is caused by the thickness or lightness of the clouds or Maya coating, and as the eye and the sun approximate nearer and nearer, the clouds are dissipated away, and so as the soul comes nearest to God, Maya vanishes. Take another example of analogy used by the same school of thinkers. and this is a most favorite one with them. It is the simile of the sun shining in many pots of water, serving to illustrate the principle that the souls are derived from God. Here, the resemblances are not exact, and the consequence does not follow. In the one case, we have only Brahm from which we have got to derive many souls. On the other hand, we have one sun and many pots which are also filled with water to reproduce not many suns, but merely the shadow or reflection of the sun. Neither is the shadow the same as the sun, nor are the pots and water derived from the sun. But let us view the analogy from another point and see how pregnant it is. The sun is Brahm, the pot is Maya or Pasha, binding the naturally expansive water, or the soul, and the reflection of the sun is God's presence in man, and the soul's reflection or light passes through the water and lies on it, and yet is not contaminated nor touched by it. So God, being a Jnana Svarupi, Chit or Mahachaitanyam, though in contact with the world and souls, are not tainted by and feels no weariness, nor change, Udarana, to be, and the breaking of the pot, Pashakshaya, releases the water from its confined condition, and it vanishes into invisible vapor before the heat of the sun, Arul of God. In the same way, almost every analogy employed by the Hindu idealists can be easily shown to falsify their own position and support the position herein established. Analogy, I may say, is largely used in this work as a method of proof, as any other kind of proof is hardly possible when dealing with the nature of the very ultimate of all existences. The conjunction of the mind and body, it is admitted, is a unique phenomenon in nature. Its conjunction cannot be proved, being the very ultimate of all facts. The position can only be proved or illustrated by various analogies. Say, for instance, the analogy of vowels and consonants, Vide Sutra number 2. So we pass on from this conjunction of mind and body to that of soul and mind, and to that of Brahm or God and soul, and the unions in all these cases are analogous. 12th Sutra, on the mode of worship of God, who surpasses powers of thought and speech. Sutra, let the Jivatma, after washing off its mala, which separates it from the strong lotus feet of the Lord, and mixing in the society of bhaktas, Jivanmuktas, whose souls abound with love, having lost dark ignorance, contemplate their forms and the forms in the temples as his form. Commentary. This treats of the mode of finding and worshipping the Pathi who cannot be seen and thought of, and consists of 4 arguments. First argument, Churnika, get rid of the 3 malas. Vartakam, it is pointed out that the 3 malas should be got rid of, as they will only beget ignorance or evil instead of wisdom. Udarana, let the true jnani leave alone the 3 mala, namely karma, which is the effect and cause of good and bad acts, maya, from which is developed the tattvas, from earth to motive, and anava, which begets ahankara, as these will harm him. Second argument, Churnika, join the society of Shiva Jnanis. Vartakam, it is pointed out that the society of Shiva Bhaktas should be sought, as others will only impart evil. Udarana, the karma will not affect the true Jnani who, leaving the society of ignoble persons who forget themselves and suffer in mala, join the society of Bhaktas and understand with the light of God. Third argument, Churnika, worship Shiva Jnanis and Shiva Linga as Shiva. Vartakam, it is enjoined that the forms of Bhaktas and the Shiva Linga should be worshipped as Parameshvara, as he shines brightly in these forms, though he is present in everything. Udarana, the Lord, Pathi, wishing that all should understand him, gives his form to his Bhaktas, who desire to know him, and makes them know himself, and keeps them in his own self, and makes himself visible as butter in curds. To those entangled in Pasha, he is invisible as is butter in milk. B. As the fire appears distinct from the pieces of wood when rubbed together, so the Lord, who exists in all visible forms, and yet is different from them, will be present in a visible form, composed of mantra. To those who can view the form itself as God, will he not appear as that form itself? Fourth argument, Churnika, cease not to so worship him. Vartakam, The worship of him in these forms is enjoined as, though these forms are not himself, yet he is in these forms, just as man, though constituted of muscles, bones, nerves, etc., yet is neither muscles nor bones, etc. Udarana A. To the seer, God is neither different from all things, nor is he one with them, nor one and different from them. He is in the general Advaita relation with them, and everything is his form, and yet let the Advaiti worship the form which excites his love most. B. As acts only lead to ignorance unless the previous karma is removed, jnanam will not rise. This karma will cease and jnanam will rise when the society of jnanis is sought and they are worshipped. Therefore worship them in all love. C. To forget the Lord who made him know himself and transformed him like unto himself is an inexcusable sin. Though he who is always a servant is now transformed like unto himself, yet he continues to be only his servant. Hence his strength consists in the worship. E. O thou student of Shaiva Siddhanta, those who have 1 and 2 malas, namely Vijnana Kalars and Pralaya Kalars, lose their mortal nature and attain the divine knowledge by respectively being taught intuitively by the innate God and by being purified by the eye, etc., of the divine Guru. This book is intended to be taught to Sakalars who have 3 malas by their Supreme Guru. Notes: in Sivagnana Siddhi, the purport of this sutra is given as Adaivar Lakshana or Bhakta Lakshana. The Jivan Mukta, even after he has obtained the Anubhuti as described in the last sutra, cannot afford to indulge in karmic acts so long as he is encased in the flesh. There is no playing with fire. If he does, he is sure to be brought back again into the cycle of karmic evolution. Hence the caution conveyed in the first argument. But if he should do anything or wish to do anything, let him join the society of Bhaktas and avoid the society of sinners. He is also directed to love them and worship their forms and the forms in the temple. In this mode of worship is pointed out the way for other mortals of worship of God who surpasses powers of thought and speech. In the preceding pages I have pointed out why it is not possible to know God, yet in our own heart of hearts we yearn to worship and glorify him, and this necessity is also provided for. The principle of it is found in the fact that God is omnipresent and is one with, or in Advaita relation with everything, animate and inanimate. We must worship him as one of these. Hence it is in the Veda or Sri Rudram, God is addressed by naming every object of creation. The jnani who sees the objects does not see them though, but only God's presence. However, for mortals they have got a choice. God, though he is present in everything, is non-apparent as the ghee in the milk, but there are forms in which we can feel his presence more apparently, like the butter in the curds, like the fire latent in wood and the ghee latent in milk. If the great Jyoti light is non-apparent, but with the churner of love and the rope of knowledge one churns the milk or rubs the firewood, butter or fire will become apparent. So it is in the body of Bhaktas that God's presence is a living presence, and it is by reason of this the divine word that ye are the temple of God is preeminently true. So when we want to worship him, we must worship him in the Bhakta. But it is not the whole truth to say that we are alone the temples of God. He is everywhere, and especially in forms which excite our love most. 4a, which is the general rule for all. It does not matter what form people choose, provided it is that which excite their love most. Passing beyond this law is the principle that all the forms in the temples are what are said to be mantra svarupam. The form adopted is not an unmeaning stock or stone, but one full of meaning and of the divine idea. I have elsewhere enlarged upon this subject, and it may be here sufficient to remark that mantrams are symbolic representations of the deity by the ear, and when the same are converted into symbols of the eye, we get the forms in our temples. 3b, let not the ignorant therefore sneer at our temples. The various cautions conveyed in the argument arguments and udaranas of this very sutra, not to mistake the symbol for the truth and not to suppose that God is only present in these forms, will clear up all doubts that may exist in the matter. Then again, of all the forms that are to be met with in our temples, from Guri Shankar, Mount Everest, to Cape Comorin and beyond, and from the caves of Elephanta to Mahabalipuram, the form of the linga is the most universal and frequent, and not only so, it is in fact the most ancient form of worship. It may be noticed that the linga form of worship is the one most met with in the pages of the Mahabharata. For instance, see the conversation which takes place between Vyasa and Ashwatthama, after the latter was defeated by Arjuna, in which Vyasa points out that the real cause of superiority in Arjuna consisted in his worshipping the linga form of Shiva, whereas Ashwatthama worshipped a personal form of Shiva. But it is not only in the pages of Mahabharata and Ramayana that this form of worship is met with, but hundreds of passages from the Vedas and Upanishads may be quoted to prove the worship. The reader is further cautioned not to mistake the linga for any phallic symbol, as is ignorantly supposed. See the pages of the Secret Doctrine for an explanation of the Lipika, which almost applies to the linga. The words of the great poet: "There was a time when meadow, grove, and stream, the earth, and every common object to me did seem, apparelled in celestial light, the glory and the freshness of a dream." This is as regards the recollections of the child, but scientists may or may not agree with the poet, if the child does possess any thoughts at all at the time. The poet had yet to rise to the thought that to the true bhakta or jnani, the earth and every common object will appear apparelled in celestial light, and more the earthly aspect will altogether vanish before him, and the divine presence alone will be felt. In praise of Mikandadeva, the saint Mikandadeva has translated, together with reasons and udaranas for the benefit of mankind, the great Sivagnana Botham, which was graciously given out by Nandi at the earnest entreaties of my master, Sanat Kumara. Let me worship the teacher who has translated in Tamil Sivagnana Botham, which, like the mirror reflecting a great mountain, contains in itself all the truth contained in all the learned Shastras.